Your translator is lying, the single dad waiter who saved a billionaire from a huge mistake. He had been a waiter for 11 years. Not the kind of waiter who treats the job like a waiting room, like something to pass through on the way to something better. He had been that kind once, maybe. But that was before his wife left, before his daughter started calling him Baba every morning with that sleepy face, before he understood that a steady job done with dignity was not a small thing. It was, in fact, everything. His name, for the purpose of this story, does not matter. What matters is what he carried with him every single day he walked into that hotel, a 5-star property in the heart of Sao Paulo, the kind of place where businessmen close deals over dinner that cost more than his monthly salary. He carried plates. He carried patience. And he carried something nobody in that building knew about him. He spoke Mandarin. Not tourist Mandarin. Not ni hao and a smile. Real Mandarin. Boardroom Mandarin. The kind that comes from 12 years of listening, really listening, to the conversations happening on the other side of the tables he served. He had picked it up the way some people pick up a song by hearing it too many times. One phrase at a time. One conversation at a time. He never studied formally. He never told anyone. It was just a thing he knew, the way some people know how to read the weather by the color of the sky. He never thought it would matter. Then came the Tuesday evening that changed everything. The reservation was made for 8 people. A private dining suite on the top floor, the kind of booking that came with a dedicated server and very specific instructions about discretion. The guest of honor was a wealthy businessman from Hong Kong. Successful man. The kind who had built something from nothing, which the waiter respected. He had done the same, just on a much smaller scale. The Hong Kong businessman had flown in to finalize a deal, a port logistics acquisition worth tens of millions of dollars, the kind of investment that would anchor his company's expansion across South America. He had brought his team. He had also brought a translator. The translator was a local man, hired through an agency, smooth in the way that very confident people are smooth. He shook hands firmly. He smiled at everyone. He adjusted his cufflinks when he thought nobody was watching. The waiter noticed all of this, the way a man who has spent 11 years reading rooms notices things, not because he was suspicious, but because noticing was simply what he did. The dinner began pleasantly enough. The first course went out. Wine was poured. The conversation started in Mandarin on one side of the table. The Hong Kong businessman and his 2 colleagues, and the translator turned it into Portuguese for the Brazilian side. Everyone nodded. Everyone smiled. The numbers discussed were large. The mood was optimistic. The waiter moved around the table the way he always did, present without being seen, filling glasses before they were empty, removing plates before anyone noticed they were done. He was background noise. He was furniture that refilled your water. He was also listening. The first thing he caught was small. The Hong Kong businessman said something in Mandarin, a phrase about contract terms, specifically about a renegotiation clause, something that would protect his company if the market shifted in the first 2 years. A sensible protection, a standard ask. The translator turned it into Portuguese and said something about an exclusive arrangement with fixed terms, no flexibility, no exit window. The waiter paused at the sideboard. He told himself he had misheard. He told himself Mandarin was a tonal language, and he was not a professional interpreter, and he could absolutely be wrong about what he thought he heard. He poured a glass of water. He went back to the kitchen. He stood in the service corridor for a moment. The thing about making a mistake in his position was that it cost him everything. He was a single father. His daughter's school fees were due in 2 weeks. He had no savings cushion, no fallback, no family money. This job, this exact job, with its exact tips from exactly this kind of client, was the entire architecture of their small, careful life. If he walked back into that room and said something wrong, something that offended the wrong person, he would be dismissed before dessert was served. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the question she asked him every evening when he came home. "Baba, how was your day?" And the kind of answer he would be able to give, not the answer about money or jobs, the deeper answer, the kind that lives under the surface of everything a parent does, the constant invisible question of what kind of person you are, showing your child how to be. He went back in. The second course was cleared. The main course arrived. The conversation deepened. The Hong Kong businessman was now discussing the specific liability clauses, the points that would govern what happened if the deal went sideways. The translator was rendering this into Portuguese. The waiter moved from place to place, listening. And by the time the third translation left the translator's mouth, he was certain, not 90% certain, certain. The translator was not translating. He was rewriting. Not every word, not obviously. He was keeping the broad strokes the same, the deal structure, the timeline, the general numbers. But the specifics, the legal edges, the things that would matter enormously in a courtroom or a dispute, those were being quietly changed. Terms that protected the Hong Kong businessman were becoming terms that bound him. Conditions that were supposed to be flexible were being made rigid. The waiter did not have a law degree, but he understood enough to understand that the man at the head of the table was being walked very slowly towards something he had not agreed to. He watched the Brazilian side of the table. He noticed, for the first time, that one of the men across from the Hong Kong businessman, a man who had said almost nothing all evening, was looking at the translator with a very specific kind of attention, not listening, monitoring. The waiter had seen that look before, on poker nights in the neighborhood, when someone was watching to make sure a hand was being played right. He set down a serving dish. He straightened up, and then, as he leaned slightly toward the Hong Kong businessman to pour a small amount of wine, he said something in a voice so low it could have been mistaken for a murmur about the vintage. He said, in Mandarin, "The translator is not giving you accurate terms." The table did not stop. No one dropped a fork. The Brazilian side heard nothing, because the waiter had spoken too quietly and in the wrong language. But the Hong Kong businessman heard it. His eyes moved to the waiter, not with alarm, not with suspicion, just with the careful focus of a man who has survived in business long enough to know that the most important information in a room sometimes comes from the most unexpected direction. He said nothing. He set his glass down, and then he looked at the translator and asked him, very politely, to repeat the last clause he had just translated. The translator repeated it. The Hong Kong businessman nodded, and then asked again, phrasing it differently, asking specifically about the renegotiation window. The translator gave an answer. The Hong Kong businessman turned to one of his own colleagues and spoke to him quietly in Mandarin, and the colleague's expression shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, but not quite. The dinner ended early, not dramatically, not with accusations or raised voices. The Hong Kong businessman thanked everyone for their time and said his legal team would need to review a few items before anything was finalized. The Brazilian side left quickly. The translator followed them, 2 steps faster than necessary, and did not say goodbye to the serving staff. The Hong Kong businessman stayed behind, while his team gathered their documents and bags. He found the waiter in the corridor, stacking the last of the cleared plates onto a trolley. He walked over. He asked, in Mandarin, how long the waiter had spoken the language. 12 years, the waiter said, self-taught. The businessman was quiet for a moment. He asked why the waiter had said anything at all, why he had risked his job, his evening, possibly more, for a stranger he had never met. The waiter thought about this. My daughter asks me how my day went every night, he said. I would like to be able to answer her honestly. That was all. The deal was halted. The Hong Kong businessman's legal team reviewed the documents against what had actually been agreed in Mandarin, and the discrepancies were significant enough that they pulled out of the original negotiation entirely. The deal was restructured months later, with a different translator, under terms that were accurately conveyed. The translator from that evening was removed from the agency's roster. The waiter continued working at the hotel. He served dinner. He refilled glasses. He was background noise. He was furniture that remembered everything. 3 months after that Tuesday evening, an envelope arrived at the hotel addressed to him. Inside was a letter, written in both Mandarin and Portuguese, and inside the letter was something else, something that made his hands go still for a long moment in the middle of the service corridor. The letter said, in part, a man who tells the truth when it costs him something is the rarest person in any room. That night, when his daughter asked him how his day went, he sat down at the kitchen table and told her. Not just the facts of it, not just the dinner and the deal in the corridor. He told her the part in the middle, the part where he stood alone, between the kitchen and the dining room, and made a decision about who he wanted to be. She listened the way children listen when something is real, without interrupting, without looking at anything else. When he finished, she thought about it for a second. Then she said, "Good, Baba." That was all. And somehow, that was the part that stayed with him the longest.